How's it going, you guys, and welcome back to the channel. There are some great slasher horror icons out there, such as Michael Myers, Leatherface, Jason Voorhees, Freddy Kruger, Chucky. You can name a whole bunch more after that. So what if I told you there was a movie where two of these famous icons clashed together in an epic duel? That's right, this film is one of those films. Today we're going to be talking about Freddy vs. Jason. Freddy vs. Jason is directed by Ronny Yu and is the crossover film between the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street films. The film follows Freddy Kruger, who's losing his power, and he ends up taking control of Jason Voorhees in order to return to Elm Street and continue his murder spree. However, Jason proves to be a force to be reckoned with, which forces Freddy to take matters into his own hands to stop him. If you've watched any film from the Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street franchises, I'm sure that this film is right up your alley. And I'm sure it was an exciting time when this film was announced, seeing these two guys cross over into one film. And we get to see the classic charm from both sides. Personally, I'm more of a Nightmare on Elm Street fan, but also enjoy the Friday the 13th franchise, despite it not having the best films, in my opinion. But like most horror films, Freddy vs. Jason definitely isn't a great one, but isn't a disappointing one either when it comes to a crossover between these two icons. For most of this movie, it spends a lot of time with Freddy and Jason engaging in the classic murder scenes that a lot of horror fans love, and building up the tension between Freddy and Jason. However, it just feels like one movie from each franchise got mixed in together for most of the runtime, because we never really get to see Jason and Freddy duel it out until the last half hour of the film. When it comes to the Friday the 13th films, I can never take them that seriously, considering they all follow the exact same formula, with Jason roaming around Camp Crystal Lake, murdering all the campers in the most creative ways possible, which carries over to this film. But the first Nightmare on Elm Street film, that's my favorite horror film of all time, and Robert Englund as Freddy is definitely the best when it comes to classic slasher characters. It was also great to see Englund in this film, and it seems like a fitting end for his career as Freddy. It's always fun to hear Freddy in his quick-witted dialogue, and seeing him in the dream world tormenting his victims. As for Jason, I always love seeing him pull off some of the most over-the-top yet creative kills imaginable, and it's even better watching that happen through a more modern scope. But as I mentioned before, for a film called Freddy vs. Jason, you never really get to see them on screen together that often, and it takes a little over an hour to get that. And most of that hour is just filled with a group of teens trying to figure out how to bring Freddy into the real world just so they can end his reign of terror. And of course, what you get with them is a whole bunch of bad acting and the most predictable horror cliches imaginable. Each one of the characters in the group all have little to no personality that I really couldn't care less about what happens to any of them. A couple of them can also get really irritating to be around that it only makes me wish Jason or Freddy would kill them much sooner.
What do you see in him? I don't know. Freddy has a cute ass.
And it really sucks that most of the runtime was dedicated to just following these teens, because I wanted to tune them out entirely until Freddy and Jason were on screen together. But truth be told, with any horror film like this, I can't find time to connect with any of the characters that aren't the killers, with the exception of Sidney Prescott, Nancy Thompson, and Laurie Strode. You can literally slap a murder me sign on the back of all of them, and I'm sure you wouldn't be missing them anytime soon. But when the film finally ends up reaching those last 30 minutes, oh boy, what a treat. The last 30 minutes of Freddy vs. Jason completely ditches the whole horror side of the story, and it ends up turning into an all-out brawl between these two killers. And it's one of the most campy fights I've ever seen in film. And it honestly seems very fitting for these two killers. And when I say campy, I mean campy. We've got the rock music playing in the background, Freddy delivering his usual dialogue to Jason, and it comes with some very comedic moments that will just have you wondering what the hell the writers were smoking when they were writing out these scenes. Probably my most favorite moment during this fight is when Freddy tosses Jason towards a wall with pipes, and Jason ends up bouncing against every single pipe, and there's pinball sounds playing as it happens. Don't believe me? See for yourself. I mean, how can you possibly be mad at a decision like that? It's amazing. It seems very fitting, especially for a killer as charismatic as Freddy. Also, it definitely would have been a little bit odd to see Freddy and Jason just fighting for no reason. But in a way, it seems a little bit childish for Freddy to go after Jason because he's stealing all of Freddy's victims. But I guess that's what you get when you're a child murderer for however long Freddy's been one.
Being dead wasn't a problem, but being forgot, now that's a bitch!
It's also pretty odd that people can just forget a name as iconic as Freddy's just so he doesn't kill any more people. But I guess the plot has to happen somehow.
What was the name? What was the name? Freddy.
Horror movie. Who cares? And believe it or not, just when you thought you couldn't feel any sympathy for any famous slasher, Freddy vs. Jason managed to do that, for me at least, in the case of Jason. Don't get me wrong, the whole Jason Voorhees backstory is already very heartbreaking, but in this film, it dives a little bit deeper into that, and I actually managed to feel something for Jason. Freddy spends a lot of time tormenting Jason throughout the entire film just to make the teens remember his name, but during their fight sequence, it ends up bringing you back to Camp Crystal Lake when Jason was just a boy, and when he was ridiculed for his appearance. Because Freddy uses the victim's fear as a weapon to take advantage of them, he ends up using Pamela Voorhees and her disappointment towards Jason to his advantage, and it can get a little bit heartbreaking to watch. Going back to the whole appearance aspect, there's one scene where Freddy is insulting a younger version of Jason while simultaneously talking about his mother and physically abusing him to make it worse. It's obviously killer versus killer, but in the end, Jason kind of becomes the one you end up rooting for. And it sucks for us Nightmare fans because, well, Jason is the hero, I guess, in this story, and Freddy just becomes the same old evil guy he always is. But it's still pretty charming.
Now there's a face only a mother could love. Yeah.
It also doesn't manage to take away from the bloodbath and gore that happens during this last half hour. So overall though, Freddy vs. Jason isn't necessarily a horrible film, but it also isn't a great film. Until the last 30 minutes. It was inevitable, but I really enjoy the fact that this film decided to do a crossover between two iconic horror icons and make the final 30 minutes some of the most campy yet badass 30 minutes I've seen in horror films. As for the rest of the film, it definitely suffers from being extremely cliche, and it doesn't really give a whole lot of time to see Freddy and Jason on screen together. I definitely didn't expect a film like this to stand out as amazing, considering that the previous films in both franchises aren't good, except for the first Nightmare on Elm Street film. But this film definitely does a great job in taking two iconic slasher villains and combining their formulas, pleasing the fans of both franchises. You probably won't enjoy this film if you haven't seen a few films from Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, but I'm sure you'll still be able to find some sort of entertainment value during it. So with all that in mind, because I'm on Team Freddy, I'm going to go ahead and give Freddy vs. Jason 6 out of 10 Freddy Krueger gloves.
Welcome to my world, bitch.
So I'd like to know, what do you guys think of Freddy vs. Jason? Do you love it? Hate it? Not care to watch it? Let me know in the comments below. I'd also really love to know if you're Team Freddy or Team Jason. That'd be really fun. But if you made it this far in the video, I'd appreciate it if you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Thank you guys so much for... He's here. Come get me, bitch! And I'm dead.